I'm delighted once again to be joined by Konstantin Samoilov, one of the most respected voices on YouTube about what is now happening inside Russia. And of course, what is happening inside Russia and outside of Russia is remarkable and of huge historical importance as well. So it's good to be able to cut through all the noise, cut through all the false narratives and nonsense and second and third hand views and actually talk to somebody who I'm assuming still has, some sources on the ground and like myself monitors a lot of Russian language news and commentary. I think it's essential to get that source of information and insight. Before we jump into this conversation, thank you to everybody who supports the channel and especially everybody who has supported the series of events that we've been running this year. And of course, all these things take resources. So I'm immensely grateful to everyone who's bought a coffee or joined the channel on Patreon. And of course, grateful to everyone who has similarly supported Konstantin's channel as well. Welcome back.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here as always. I was
Always a
looking
pleasure.
forward to a conversation.
We never ran out of things to talk about as well, which and that's maybe the unfortunate side of things. And today is no exception. We've gone through dozens of topics, picked sort of five or six to cover off the conversation, but there is just fire hose of news. One of the ones which perhaps didn't, really make too much of a splash, because it was kind of obvious it was heading this direction, is the formal announcement of the US that they're pulling out of the so-called negotiation process for a ceasefire. I tend to think that process was a bit of a sort of hollow sham, or if you want to be charitable, built on unrealistic foundations. But now they're sort of formally pulling out, and there's at least some little hint in some of the things Trump has said that he sort of is starting to think that, hey, this Putin guy doesn't seem to really want peace after all. What a shocker.
What a shocker. That's right. Um, you know, before we start with that news, I'd like to step back in history and share something that I'm feeling right now. It kind of is a flashback from the past. Um, Late 80s in the USSR, things were changing. The change was started by Mikhail Gorbachev. He was the reformer of the Soviet Union, and he announced perestroika and pluralism of opinions, pluralism мнения. Okay, pluralism of opinions was absolutely a revolutionary idea for us. The state allowed us to have a different opinion. Before it was forbidden, and Gorbachev said it's okay. You can have your own opinion. And boy, did he open a floodgate of changes. Anyway, fast forward a few years, 89, 90, 91. The USSR was changing so fast. It basically was falling apart in front of our eyes. We didn't know at the time, but it was. That we couldn't keep up with the news. There were so many, and they were like a kaleidoscope. And this is the feel that I get these days. There are so many news, and they come out every day, and they're all important. And you have so much just to think of it, and you already have something else coming up that's revolutionary. Just with this news that you mentioned, it happened a week ago, but it feels like old news now, but the USA is pulling out of this peace process. We talked about it quite a few times already, and somehow we knew, both of us knew, and somehow President Donald Trump didn't know about Vladimir Putin, and now he's saying, oh, perhaps he didn't want peace after all. Well, no shit, Sherlock, pardon my language. No, he didn't want peace in the first place. Okay, he needed something he could declare victory. He needed a break. He needed, a way out, so to speak, and he's received it. Look, he's going to be mingling with tons of people in 2 days, in Moscow, shaking hands with Z, with perhaps the European leader, Vucic, you know, showing off, telling everyone in the world, hey, look, Russia is not isolated anymore. We're hosting the parade. Everyone shakes hands with us, with me, and we're back. And he is back. He has won, okay, thanks to Donald Trump and his genius strategy of bringing peace to Ukraine in 24 hours, you know. So I'm pretty angry.
Absolutely. He's rehabilitated him in the eyes of some in the global community, although many were quite keen to do that anyway, it has to be said, unfortunately, including India and parts of the so-called global south. Um, but also, the way you phrase that is interesting because two opportunities actually have been handed to Putin. One is this sort of normalization of his hideous regime and actions, almost letting him off the hook. The other one is that Trump, through his envoy Witkoff, gave Russia an extraordinary array of concessions in the process. Some of those concessions, I expect they weren't even being demanded. You know, they bent over backwards to say you can have this and that and the other, and Ukraine will never be part of NATO, etc. So theoretically, Putin had an extraordinary deal on the table. He was given an extraordinary get out of jail free card, and he has chosen to throw that back in the faces of everybody who was, trying to do him a huge favor. Now, of course, we wouldn't have done that favor. We think it's immoral, but nonetheless, there was that opportunity. If you're looking for a way out, there it is. And you can make endless propaganda hay out of it if you accept those kind of conditions. Why has he so demonstrably rejected it and now risks upsetting, Trump, throwing insult after injury?
He has used Trump and he has received from Trump what he needed. I think he could care less if Trump is mad at him or, you know, not happy with Russia, with Putin. The the deal is done, so to speak. He's received everything he wanted to. I think in order to understand what happened, we need to look closely at the Kremlin and how they're planning to live the rest of Putin's term, the following months, years, and look into Putin. A lot of people miss one important point. They don't understand Vladimir Putin's goal. A lot of people in the West, in Russia, say, well, he wants to make Russia great, strong, he wants to make Russia, um, uh, he wants to strengthen traditional values. He doesn't want to do any of that. His only goal is to hang on to his absolute power for as long as he can. Okay. He's in the sweet spot right now. And as long as he stays there, that's what he's desiring. And he didn't take the deal. He didn't accept this deal from Trump or Witkoff. I don't know. Because, well, imagine if he did. Peace in Ukraine. Million Russian soldiers with PTSD, with guns, very angry, who have seen blood, who have seen death, who are trained killers, who have killed people, come back to Russia, come back home. Okay, they start problems. Economy has fallen apart completely. It's not going to fall apart. It has fallen apart already. Um, Something needs to be done. Now there's peace, fine. Let's look at the domestic issues. Let's find out why everything is going to hell. These are the kind of questions he would be facing in peaceful time if he a peace deal was signed. He doesn't need that. He needs to keep his people in Ukraine. He needs to freeze the front lines He needs to take Russia and change it, put it onto the military tracks. He has started doing it already. They are conditioning Russian people to the big changes that are coming. And these changes are, well, I think we'll talk about them. They're going to be economic changes, and we'll talk a little later. I think you have a question about that coming up. But that's why I think that he gave up this opportunity to make the peace deal, because he just doesn't need peace. That's not his goal.
That not regime survival as well is threatened perhaps more by peace than it is by war. We'll
Much
come,
more,
yeah.
much more, much more. Yes.
And well, let's stay on that. Let's deal with that straight away because it seems, at least, that a big chunk of the economy has been militarized. We've talked about this numerous times, but it's not just about the money that's gone in there, and of course, the largest, I think, by sort of capital value enterprise in Russia now is Rosteck, which we've mentioned on a number of occasions, but it now eclipses UCOS and others, and it's quite clear there are vested interests in keeping the war going, which can't be serviced if the war ends. But something else which we've been talking about and which is becoming kind of apparent now with the shrinking size of the liquid assets within the sovereign wealth fund is that there isn't really the funds there to create the so-called financial bubble, which has helped to keep the military-industrial complex going as well. What's your impression of that? Because this was a point made by Vladimir Milov, in a recent conversation on Michael Narki's channel, that the size of the budget deficit for the next quarter actually exceeds the liquid part of the remaining Russian sovereign assets. Now, I don't know if I understood that correctly, but that seems to be what he was suggesting. That is catastrophic if true.
One correction, not in the next quarter, but in the year of 2025. They planned for that budget deficit of 1.17 trillion rubles. And that was at the end of 2024. That's what happens in Russia. The Ministry of Finance drafts the federal budget, submits it to the parliament, to State Duma. Duma reviews it, and the senators review it and accept it with or without changes, corrections, and send it to Vladimir Putin. He signs, budget becomes official. So just at the end of the last year, in November, they were planning the budget deficit for 1.17 trillion rubles. And now, just before the May holidays, the Minister of Finance officially announced that they are tripling the budget deficit for forecast for 2025. Now it amounts to 3.8 trillion rubles, which is huge. I mean, it doesn't just happen. Okay, if the Ministry of Finance allowed that to happen, then those people are inadequate. They're not professional. They need to be fired immediately. All of them replaced. Okay. Of course, they knew what they were doing. So anyway, they announced right before the May holidays, when everyone was heading towards their dachas, summer homes, and having a good time. No one really, reads the news right before the May holidays. It's a big deal in Russia. And I think in the United States, this the tactic is called Friday news dump, something like that. So that's what they did. They did the May holiday news dump, and the numbers are real that they're giving. There will be budget deficit. Well, it's going to be more than 3.8 million. That's what a trillion. That's what they're forecasting right now. Well, the thing is, right now, in the Fund of National Welfare, and the savings account of country Russia, they only have 3.2 trillion rubles left. And it's not liquid assets. It's half in gold and half in yuans, Chinese yuans. Well, Chinese yuans they can use fairly quick, but gold they can't. That's a lot of gold to sell at once, and they can't do it. They have to fragment it and sell it piece by piece because it's a sanction, basically. It would be an under the table sale or sales. So at this point, 3.2 trillion, even if it consisted of Russian rubles, would not be enough to cover the entire budget deficit for the year 2025. They are officially out of money, and the Minister of Finance admitted it. Well, not a surprise to me, definitely not a surprise to you. We talked of it so many times. Thing is, I forecasted before. And now I'm just telling what the Minister of Finance I quote the Minister of Finance. That's a fact. So that's what's going on. They are facing a dilemma what to do next. Where to get the money?
And one option is to print it, of course, but that has some dire economic implications. So if you start sort of fabricating the main numbers, if you start printing money in a sort of I would say in a concealed fashion, and you find various schemes and vehicles to call it something else, but what you're actually doing is creating a financial bubble. And then, as we suspect they have been doing, you massage the inflation figures, which are still high. You know, they're still 10% and above. And I think there was a commentator on Russian TV who actually was a Duma deputy, I think, who came out and said, yes, but it's not as bad as Turkey and Argentina, and that's all
Yes.
you can say at this point. But the real inflation rate is more likely to be in 20 and 30%, according to various studies. Well, if you go out and start printing money to fund this insane war, then surely the inflation rate is just going to start galloping.
You can't just print money. If you just print money, you lose the control of the situation. By the way, they have been printing money. Money mass has doubled since beginning of the war. The money mass, the amount of money in circulation in the economy. But they were doing it slowly, fairly slowly. Now they started literally printing money. They're printing it fast. The way they doing it is called repo auctions, and I think we talked about it also. It's a not that complicated scheme. You know, the Russian central bank by law cannot um, print money and buy and finance the Ministry of Finance, right? So what they do is they give credit to commercial banks, and commercial banks in turn take that money that not credit, loan in English is called loan. So the central bank issues loan to commercial banks. They take that loan money, they go to the Ministry of Finance, they buy government securities, government bonds, and they use the bonds as collateral for the central bank for the loan that they receive for the central bank. And those loans are short term, 1 month. So once the payback time comes, instead of paying money back, they give the collateral. They give it to the central bank. And that's how printing money in Russia works, basically. They did it twice in November of last year, and they're saying that's just an extraordinary measure. We're going to do it twice, and that's it. One time thing only, you know. Now they're doing it every week, and I believe, don't quote me on that, but that's a few 100 billion rubles every single week. I think their target is 1 trillion a month, but again, I don't have the numbers right in front of me. So they're using this practice now as systematic money printing. And this is what's happening in Russia. But that's not just what they're doing. Uh, I think, and we will see that very soon, that they're going to change the way Russian stock market is working, and they're going to do another huge privatization. Only not the way it was done after the USSR fell apart. as you remember, those tons of property that belonged to the state, and they didn't know what to do with it. The state disappeared. So they came up with this idea that every citizen gets a voucher worth so many rubles. And for that voucher, a citizen could buy a piece of government property. Okay. And that so it becomes private properties transfer. It's actually a good idea. As economist, I like it. And it was done properly in Poland, from what I remember, in Czech Republic. But of course, in Russia, yeah, Russia is a different case. It was not done right, but it was done. So the state properties were privatized, and then when Putin came in to power, what he started doing, he started buying the private properties back, large factories, entire industries, and putting them into large corporations. For example, Rostech is a perfect example. Right now, it's owned by the state. A good share of Rostech, all that's a group of companies, and I believe there are over 600,000 people employed there, and that's basically a Russian military-industrial complex, and it belongs to the state. But it's a corporation with state ownership, and it's controlled by a friend of Putin, Chemizov. Okay, and this is just an example, and it's all not private any longer. Helicopter factory in Rostov-on-Don, where I grew up, was produces. I think they still produce Mi-8, Mi-8 helicopters, and Ka-52, the black shark, something like that, attack helicopters. Used to be a private company, privately owned, and the state bought it from the owner, who received it as a part of privatization back in the early 90s. And that's just as one example. What they're trying to do now is there are a lot of companies that are in trouble. Take VTB,
Our favorite
VTB bank.
bank, Putin's bank, I think he
They
called
just
it.
received $2 trillion bailout from the state, and they need, I think, another 2 trillion because things are that bad. There are so many different enterprises, plants, factories, production facilities that are on the verge of bankruptcy. And basically, what they trying to do is they go into the state with hand saying, "Hey, we need some money. Please bail us out." But the state does. They used to do that. They used to give money left and right when times were rich and there was no war. But now they can't do that. There's no money. So right now it is being toyed with this idea that they're going to freeze all savings of Russian citizens in bank accounts, or perhaps partially freeze, not all, but some part of it. And they're going to have to use those money to make everyone in Russia an investor. What a sexy idea, huh? You're just a citizen, you have some money, hey, now you're an investor. We're going to take your money and we're going to exchange it for some shares of, let's say, a large company that extracts coal in Kuzbas. Huh? Nice. Nice. You have great opportunities because that company is going to work and it's going to make profit and it's going to share its profit with investors with you. You're going to not only you're going to keep your money and possibility to grow it through if the shares go up, but you'll be receiving dividends. Okay. So what a sexy idea. And
When the
that's what we're
entire
going to do now.
economy
That's going
implodes,
to be
that's everybody's money
a
goes into
very,
that.
very strong boost to the economy. Okay. But that's going to be a huge hit for the citizens. Remember, I've said many times that at the end, it's the Russian people, Russian taxpayers, who are going to pick up the bill. And this is it, Jonathan. This is happening. They're
It's
picking up the
happening.
bill. So
And it's
this is
remarkable.
another way of boost economy. Another way we come up with money. And other ways, well, there is a third way. And I think that all these three ways, methods, will be combined in one way or another. They're going to limit the rights of people. They're going to announce some kind of a hybrid state of economy, military economy, perhaps something. And this is what I mean by saying Putin will turn Russia onto the military tracks. Okay, he's going to announce victory in SVO, but at the same time say, hey, we're victorious, right? We've done this, we have achieved this, this, and that, but there's still war going on. Right now, it's worse than ever because right now it's the masks are off. We understand it's neo-Nazis in Europe and and all of that. They're going to sell it, package it nicely, and sell it to Russian people. And then they will say that you have to tighten your waist belts. You know, things are tough. I think yesterday, Dmitry Peskov came out and said, well, you know what? The national interests are above personal ones. And that is going to be um, their slogan for the next, I don't know, months and years, perhaps. The national interests are above personal ones. It's already been formulated. It's been voiced by Dmitry Peskov. So this is it. We're seeing a huge change in Russia in the making, right in front of our eyes.
So this is extraordinary, and this is an incredible historical process unfolding. But it seems that it's not just a return to the Soviet Union. We've already sort of partially had that to a sort of controlled command economy, and the sort of, all the favors for Putin's friends. We're returning to serfdom here because if people no longer have access to their funds, their earnings, no freedoms whatsoever, and in fact, Putin's not just nationalizing the military industrial sector. It sounds to me like he's nationalizing the population itself.
You're right on. That is absolutely what's going on. In the USSR, there was no private property. Everything you owned, like big things, apartment, government gave it to you to use, and that you could use it the entire life, and your children would be living after you. But still, it was government, the state's property. But now there's private property. Uh, it's supposed to be a free economy, market economy, okay, with private property where you can buy and own land, real estate, um, companies, and so forth. And they're not going to change that, except for, um, see, in the USSR, even communist bosses, nomenclatura, they didn't own anything. They could not get ownership of a factory or a building or an administrative building, an office center, something like that. Their belonging, whatever they owned, was connected to their job. For as long as they had job, they would get financing from the state. They would get compensation from the state. Once they lost their job, they're out of the door. Okay. Now it's totally different. Now the rulers of Russia own everything. They own businesses. They own large companies that are um, partially owned by state. You see, that's how it works. The state owns with some Putin's friends partially large companies are partially owned by the state and partially owned by Putin's friends. The state picks up expenses, pays expenses, and the profits go to Putin's friends. Nice system, okay? They want to keep it that way. And they have complete control over the society now. They've got rid of all of free courts. They've got rid of all personal freedoms that people had, freedom to assembly, you know, freedom to vote, and so forth. And basically, the only thing they have left is people. To own people, they just need to create a few laws that would make lives of people difficult and impossible to move, or nearly impossible, okay? And they would need to close down the country. And that's pretty much it. And they would have complete control over Russian people. You're right, that served them.
Yeah, it seems to be heading rapidly that way, if not parts of society already there. Two more things I wanted to touch on, and these,
One more thing
yeah,
before we jump. I'm sorry. See, it looks like it's not there, but it really is. And they're not going to announce to make it official, oh, we have a new system in Russia. No, it's a democracy. Of course, it's a democracy. Of course, every 6 years, people vote to choose new president, new old president, right? People have rights on paper. People are free. Just like in the USSR, everyone was free to leave the country. Only you needed permission from the state to leave. And without that permission, you would not be able to live. And this is what they're going to be taking the country to. So on paper, on the surface, everything would be fine. But in reality, people will be so poor um, that they would not be able to get up and go. They would be so uneducated. They would be scared. They would be um, uninformed of the internet would probably will not be there in Russia. They started slowing down not just YouTube but the internet itself. These are steps they're taking, they're already taking them, and this is where they're going to take the country in the future ultimately if nothing changes.
and many people watching this will be unaware of two systems that were in place to really control Russia's population in the Soviet period, which was ironic because freeing the serfs was supposed to, in the 1880s, was supposed to sort of go beyond that. One is the idea of an internal passport in the country. The other one, of course, then turned into having a propiska. Now, of course, if you're from the countryside, you couldn't come to the city and just buy stuff. You couldn't necessarily even buy a train ticket. So again, there are precedents for controlling Russia's population at extraordinary level through these internal tools of restriction and repression.
A lot of people wouldn't understand that, Jonathan. That's even for me, for Russian, it's really hard to understand. But my grandfather told me that he was only allowed to move out of the village in 1972. You know how? He was issued, well, given the passport. Every Russian citizen, every Soviet citizen, when coming of legal age, 18, was obliged to get a passport, domestic passport. But the thing is, if you lived in a village, you didn't have it. They didn't give it to you, but to the collective farm, to the chief, the director of the collective farm. And without passport, you couldn't travel. You couldn't move anywhere. And he had a right to hold it. And that rule was abandoned only in early 70s, late 60s or early 70s. I don't remember when exactly, but my grandfather was able to get his passport in 1972. As soon as he did that, he left the village the next day. So he moved to another place. Um, they don't need to invent anything new. They need to take old communist playbooks, blow dust off them, and change a little bit because we live in a digital age. So they need to digitize it one way or another. But trust me, Russian people who consist who create Russian state, they're very smart, they're very resourceful. They know how to uh, make a new hybrid from the old system and the new digital system that they have in Russia now. So they will reach their goal, that's for sure.
Well, there's two topics I wanted to cover off before the time we've got left. One is the potential humiliation of Putin through the targeting, not necessarily the center of Moscow, but just Ukrainian drones that are hitting various targets, mostly military targets, it has to be said, in fact, all military targets, or parts of the military industrial complex, such as a plant that's been making fiber optics for drones. If they really pull out all the stops and take advantage of the air defense systems being clustered around Moscow to hit other targets, that's a huge humiliation for Putin. And then to finish on, I wanted to touch on Kadyrov. Is he staying? Is he going? Has he had his contract renewed? And what are the implications for Putin's system of power through fear, which Kadyrov is an absolutely critical component of?
The first question, the humiliation. I don't think Putin gets humiliated by this, feels humiliation from this strikes of Russian targets. I think he could care less. That's just a chessboard for him, and he just moves um, chess pieces. That's all. What could be a humiliation if they hit targets in Moscow day after tomorrow during the V-Day parade, because Putin is making a showcase for the entire world. It's going to be televised, just like in the old Soviet tradition. That's going to be a huge fanfare about this event, and of course there will be different presidents, many presidents alongside him. So that could be humiliation, but he could use that to his own advantage to sell it to Russian people. Tell them, look, you see what they've done? You see, we're peaceful people. We're just having a nice parade. We have tons of friends came over. And look what they're doing. Okay, animals. And you know what? I'm afraid that Russian people would buy it. That's that's my opinion. So I think he could care less, other than V-Day parade. And
And he
talking
can
of
spin it. He can spin it and manipulate it and use it, as you say.
absolutely, absolutely. And then of Ramzan Kadyrov, very interesting situation. Yesterday, Ramzan publicly made an announcement that he was asking Vladimir Putin to relieve him of his position and then he made two statements. The second statement following, "Oh, you misunderstood me. All I meant was it's only the commander in chief, Almighty Vladimir Putin can make such decision. It's up to him. I'll take any his any decision. I'll follow the order. I'm an infantryman and so forth. But in my mind, it was a clear message to Vladimir Putin, a well-timed message right before the V-Day parade. And Kadyrov was desperate because he's dying. Obviously, he's not feeling well, and I think his days are numbered. We could tell that from the activity that his family started, moving with, the speed his family started moving with. They are re-registering assets from Ramzan Kadyrov's business empire onto their names. They're trying to move money out of Russia. They're trying to make deals with the heads of other states, such as United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, about protection after Ramzan Kadyrov dies. And at this point, the biggest question is unanswered. Who is going to lead Chechnya after Ramzan Kadyrov dies? He's been pushing his son Adam very hard, but it seems like Vladimir Putin doesn't favor him. And Putin is actually playing a very smart game, as he always does. He is waiting. He knows that Ramzan is a dead man walking. Okay, and he doesn't say anything. He doesn't approve anyone. He doesn't comment on the situation. He's just waiting it out. After Ramzan is gone, he will pick his successor, not Ramzan's successor, not who Ramzan wants, but his own. Okay, who he thinks would be leading Chechnya. And Ramzan doesn't like that idea. Okay, so he just made a desperate move by taking this under the carpet struggle into the public domain. And I think that's a message he sent. Hey, I am in Chechnya. I'm still alive, and I'm sitting on a keg of gunpowder. Okay? Don't disregard me because I can light it up and it can blow up. Make a deal with me. Guarantee my safety, well, the safety of my family, at least. Or let's get a deal on the successor and things will be fine. I think that's what the message was. And the most interesting part here is the message was heard because Vladimir Putin just met with Ramzan Kadyrov 2 hours ago in the Kremlin. Ramzan flew and met with the boss and they talked. What they talked about, we don't know, but he succeeded. Ramzan Kadyrov succeeded. Okay? Imagine how busy Vladimir Putin right now is. Xi Jinping is in Moscow. He just landed to Moscow. All the presidents of other countries who are going to be attending the V-Day parade, they are landing to Moscow. Vladimir Putin has his hands full, okay? Next 2 days, he'll be meeting people, mingling, shaking hands, taking pictures with them, proving everyone he's not handshakable any longer, and so forth. And then Ramzan Kadyrov can wait. It's a domestic issue. No. He pushes everyone aside. He pushes Xi Jinping aside, and he meets Ramzan Kadyrov in Moscow on May 7th. Okay? Well, I think it speaks volumes. And I also think that some kind of deal was made today, or at least they negotiated something. What will happen? I think we will see after Ramzan dies. And that's
It's
still a way.
risky, though, isn't it?
We sure will not know about it before his death.
And his sons, of course, there's this big play that his sons are going to inherit power. That's almost like a suicide mission, which I'm sure he doesn't want because those teenage sons are really not going to survive long. They're not going to be able to play that brutal political game that Kadyrov has been actually quite effective at playing.
This is the craziest thing. His son is 17. He's not of legal age. According to Russian laws and the constitution, he cannot take any official government position. Yet in Chechnya, he has taken the official position. He was given official positions. Okay, not one, but a few. I wouldn't want that position if I was him. And I think if he's smart, I think that he would be absolutely terrified by it. Okay, whether he's not or not, he is or he's not. I don't know, but I would be.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's not just about him; it's about his clan. Okay, he would be eaten alive in a matter of weeks, months. I mean, what kind of leader is he? He's 17-year-old kid. There are so many powerful clans in Chechnya who have different plans for power, for the leadership of the Chechen Republic. Ramzan Kadyrov has made so many enemies, and so many people want to take revenge, and they're just waiting for the chance. Will that kid be able to command the private army Ahmad is he respectable enough? Does he have respect? So this big, strong, scary, bearded man would take his orders. I doubt it. Who's going to be behind him giving orders? Big question, would be person with his own interests, obviously. So
And
anyway,
Putin, yeah.
it's going to be a mess. It's
And
going to be
Putin,
a mess.
Putin needs a hard man. Putin needs a tough person in that role, not a kid as well. He needs someone who strikes terror into hearts
Absolutely.
to keep control.
What Putin doesn't need is Chechnyan war number three. He's already had two, and I think it might break out after the death of Ramzan Kadyrov. But Putin certainly, it's going to be a huge blow. And then this one of the messages Ramzan sent saying, "Hey, you don't need this. You need to talk to Z and other guys. You need to do geopolitics. You need not to worry about what's going on in Chechnya. You don't need another civil war on your hands because you'll be looked upon differently by those boys if you have potential, well, breakaway state inside your own country." And I think he was heard, obviously.
He was
Putin met him today.
absolutely heard to get such a priority meeting at such a time. I'm so glad you're here to sort of, explain the optics of this, because I think that is missed by so much of the mainstream media that just to report the basic headlines without the sort of important nuance and a dissection of the power play behind it. That's everything for today. Again, hugely grateful to speak to you. Fantastic conversation. And we'll have plenty more to talk about in a couple of weeks' time, I'm sure.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure as usual. Thank you.